Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Jacob, and this is Hunt Detail, an introspective examination of nuance and detail within hunting gear and hunting woodsmanship, particularly within big game species of whitetail and elk hunting. Every week I'll be providing a solo podcast with sort of my thoughts and take on different issues within the hunting space, again, regarding hunting gear or woodsmanship. And the first one that I'm going to share with you, or sort of start with, is really an autopsy of an unfilled elk tag. About a month ago, I returned back from a backcountry archery solo elk hunt in a western state. And unfortunately, I'll spill the beans, I did not fill that tag. Now, to tell this story and to give you sort of my perspective and insight on that hunt, I need to go back a few years, about 5 years ago, when I first went on an elk hunt in a western state. It was a general elk tag in Montana, and it was public land. It was archery, DIY. Went with my dad and my brother, and I had done a great deal of e-scouting. And this was before a lot of the e-scouting resources that we have now, if you can imagine that 5 years ago. Done a lot of physical prep and done a lot of logistical prep, because all of those things are critically important when you're coming from an eastern state like I am here in Kentucky and driving 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles or whatever to a western state, an area that you've never hunted before, a game that you've never hunted before. And within the first full day of hunting, we were in elk. On day 2, we were in that same group of elk. And then on day 3, I actually shot a small 5x5, sort of a raghorn. He was sort of a satellite to a larger group of elk. And the way that I was able to accomplish that was this was incredibly steep, difficult terrain. It was near a burn or in a burn, and there were deadfall everywhere, and it was just, it was brutal, quite honestly. But I was able to get in close to the herd, listening to them bugle as they started really firing off on day 3 on their own. They would respond in the previous days, but on day 3, they started responding on their own. And for me, that was enough to get in close. I'm really simplifying the hunt here, but get in close. I think they were about 8,000 feet and in elevation. And I had a Montana decoy to sort of cover my movement, and I didn't call at all. It was purely ambush. I got on a game trail. I saw a big 6x6. I saw cows. And I knew that once something came by, it was, whether it was a cow or a bull, it was going to get an arrow. And very quickly, I had a bull at 80 yards, and he came in to 30 within seconds. And I put an arrow through his chest on a frontal shot, and it was absolutely deadly. At 30 yards, he bled out within seconds, and there was no trailing him at all. I could see him after he fell. But ultimately, that's what got me started on this elk hunting journey. It was such a rush to be involved in a hunt of that nature. The difficulty of it made the reward that much greater in terms of packing the elk out, and all of that goes along with that. And I won't go into the full details of that hunt, maybe at a later podcast. But keep in mind how I killed that elk. And then I'll circle back to this hunt in 2023. And so the autopsy part here is, in many ways, it was a success. I had never gone on a solo backcountry hunt of this type. My fitness prep was spot on. I was running miles and miles and miles every day, and really with weight on my back, running with these sort of glove type shoes to really work the individual muscles of my feet. I didn't want to run with a thick-soled tennis shoe because I knew I wouldn't be hiking in a thick-soled tennis shoe, and I would need the muscles of my feet to be strong for side hilling, etc. So my fitness was on point. I did a lot of injury recovery in terms of ice baths and that sort of thing, and that was incredibly helpful. And I've increased supplementation of different things. That seemed to be helpful. Glucosamine and chondroitin, in terms of helping my ligaments. And I'm almost a 50-year-old man at this point, so a lot of things that might not hurt somebody younger than me does impact me differently. But from this particular elk hunt, my fitness was on point. My e-scouting was also on point. I was able to get away from areas. I wanted to target areas that did not have lots of roads where ATVs could travel or e-bikes. I know a lot of folks use those things. I have no issues with them. I just don't personally use them. And I knew I didn't want to have to compete with that because I knew that was going to be difficult. So for me, it was really a function of finding areas that I believed would hold elk, but also allow me to get away from people and pressure and really enjoy myself and not feel like I have to move because elk got bumped because of an ATV or because of another hunter, that sort of thing. So my e-scouting was really top notch, and that means getting road system maps, national maps from the National Park Service, using lots of different map platforms in terms of course, Google Earth or of course, OnX, but also using other mapping platforms to look and find nuances within those areas of terrain that I had identified. So those things were on point. And then I felt like the systems I put in place whether it was my water system, my food systems, my sleep systems, all of those things were also dialed, and even systems at home while I was gone, so that my family could do well while I was gone. That it wasn't a burden on them, because I knew if it was going to be a burden on them, it was going to distract me while I was, 1,000 miles away. And then even systems with work, because I knew that if I wasn't able to feel like work was at a good spot to walk away from for 14 days, then I knew that it was going to be difficult for me to focus. So again, as I get into the hunt itself, I won't get into the details of each particular day, but what I can tell you is that on day 2, I got into elk, and these elk weren't talking particularly, or at least the bull wasn't bugling, but the cows were mewing, and I had done some cow calling. I think that got them talking, and I worked in to get I worked downwind of this particular bull. I didn't know if he was a satellite. He wasn't exactly a big bull, and there were these cows that were there, and I knew that there was potential for some extra eyeballs in it, and even eyeballs that I wasn't even aware of. Like, was there a whole herd bull somewhere? How close or how far was that herd bull? So I wanted to get downwind to sort of evaluate the situation, and it seemed like he was feeding towards a downwind spot, and if I had stayed in my position, he would have fed down to where my scent cone was going, and I didn't want that, of course. So that was how I chose to play my cards, was to circle downwind. I lost visual of him, and I don't know if I had spooked him or bumped him, but then a little bit later, a cow came in, and she came into about 30 yards of me. I had my decoy up, and then I wasn't going to shoot her. It was day 2, and I wanted to get a shot at a bull. And so I waited and waited and waited, and then it got to a point where I was like, okay, I need to start moving. The wind had shifted a bit, or the thermals had shifted, and so I moved up, and unfortunately, they caught. Eventually, I got in closer. I didn't know exactly where they were. They got in. I got in closer, but I got to a point where I got too close, and they saw movement that was unnatural. I had the decoy, but there was something that they didn't like, and they didn't catch my scent. But ultimately, they moved off, and over the course of the next, a total of 8 days, I was in elk every day, every morning and every evening, and even sometimes during the middle of the day when they were bedded. And it was an amazing experience. But I think coming out of that, and I'm not going to bore you all with it day by day. I moved to a different area. I experienced other bulls, a dinosaur of a bull, and other cows, and ultimately, none of those interactions translated. It was incredibly thick, and you would catch a piece of an elk. You might see a tail here, a shoulder here, or you'd see them moving through, trying to get to a bedding area, and it was a pretty incredible experience. I had this dinosaur bull bugling at me at roughly 40 yards, but he wasn't close enough to get a shot at, and then there were other scenarios where wind shifted and such whatnot. But I wanted to throw out a concept that I think a lot of hunters struggle with, whether it's whitetail hunting or whether it's hunting elk or maybe it's other big game. And it's really the fear of failing. And not in the sense of failing on a total hunt. It's fear of failing in that particular moment. In the moment where you have the bull that's maybe they're 100 yards away, or maybe where they're bedded, or maybe you have an idea of where they are, or maybe you hear them bugling. Maybe it's the whitetail where you have an idea where he's bedded, or you don't know where he's bedded, and you don't want to bump that. You don't want to potentially bump that deer for fear of never seeing him again. So you play it so safe that if nothing happens, then you did nothing wrong. And you can say to yourself, well, I didn't blow it. The elk was over here. I didn't bugle. I didn't execute a strategy, and therefore I didn't blow it. And that's where I think the failure of this hunt came in for me. Now, I want to circle back to the 2018 hunt. I killed that elk ambush style, much the way that I kill deer here in the East, which is ambush style. I'm up in a tree hunting whitetails. They don't sort of know that I'm there, and at least they shouldn't, and I get a shot, and then the last thing they know is that an arrow's been shot or something's been shot, and then they take off. And they hear a sound and they react, and they maybe feel it and they know something happened, but they don't know what. And I think when I knew when I went into this hunt that was my same strategy, was to find a herd, identify where they would bed, and then work into their bedding area. The problem is that they would make they were talking in the morning, they were talking in the evening, but at those particular times, they're not bedded. They are moving. And so good luck trying to be in the right spot at the right time. And so, there were times where I found elk bedded, and it was because I bugled, and the bull would respond, or scenarios of that nature. But I think when an ambush style isn't working, or whatever style you have on whatever particular hunt that you're on, I think it's critical to have maybe your core strategy, but then other strategies in your back pocket. And I think for me personally, I've taken for granted the calling side of elk hunting. I hear so much about it. Obviously, a lot of folks do it, and they complain about the results. So for me, I've always thought, well, I'll have a bugle tube and I'll have these cow calls, which I did use a lot. But I feel like, as I reflect back on this, I was being more passive than active. There was a lack of calling prep on my end. I listened to the Corey Jacobsons of the world, or the Paul Medell, otherwise known as the Elk Nut, and I listened to them both, and I understand the location bugle and some of the emotion that might be in other types of bugles if the bull has cows or doesn't have cows. I understand some of the nuance in terms of glunking or chuckling, but I don't know. I know that I have an opportunity there to bolster my elk calling system. And I'm going to call it a system because I think if you don't know your system, then when you're in the moment, you choose to do nothing again, because the fear of failing. If I do nothing, then nothing I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't blow it. And so the truth is I could have killed an elk. I could have killed a bull. I could have, a lot of things could have happened where I did exactly what I did, and I could have punched my tag. And this podcast would sound completely different, and I would be the greatest elk hunter in the world. But had I not had that failure, I wouldn't be doing this evaluation of myself in a way where I realized that my sort of chink in my armor, it really is the elk calling piece. And I'm not really, I haven't invested the time and energy and effort that I have in other areas of my prep. As I mentioned, my physical prep, my fitness, my other systems, like in terms of sleep systems, water systems, etc. It really goes down to my elk calling system. And so I just want to encourage you all to think about and reflect on, where are you most passive in your big game hunting? And obviously it could be some other type of game, but I'll focus on whitetail and elk because that's what I tend to do most. Or is your strategy so strong based on past experience that you lean on it too much in the whitetail woods? And are there other strategies that you could develop and evolve to better your hunt game, to fill that tag accordingly? And so I will leave you with that. And those are the questions that I would encourage you to reflect on, in terms of your passivity versus your proactiveness, or I would say your balcony versus your basement. What is it that what is your balcony, your strength, and what is your basement, which would be your weakness? Thank you all for listening, and you can find me on social media at J_Coons_hunts. That's YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, where I have other types of content. best of luck this season, and look forward to connecting with you again soon. All the best.